Hello, and welcome back to the Joel versus Arthritis podcast. I'm delighted to welcome our first ever guest on this sort of new venture. Will is joining me today, and he's a good friend of mine. We go back years. We used to play hockey together and sport and endeavours. And today's pod will be very much a mental health themed one. And as per previous recordings, this isn't going to be too formal. Very much want it to feel like two friends chatting in a bar, which wouldn't that be nice right now? But I find this format helps with the topic, especially one such as today's. So, Will, thank you very much for joining us, and
It's good to see you.
And agreeing to be my first ever guest and guinea pig for new format as I record this in two different ways. So thank you for agreeing to that. Do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about yourself, sort of what you do for fun and everything else?
Yeah, sure. So you asked the one thing you said ahead. One thing you said ahead of this was to sort of think about how I might describe myself in if I had to post on Twitter. And I was thinking about this. How could I sum up myself professionally and also kind of what I do in my spare time and stuff? And the one thing I kept coming back to was a jack of all trades and a master of none. So from a professional point of view, I not so long ago, I retrained as a teacher. And obviously you've got the opportunity to say whether you're going to be whether you want to go for the secondary or whether you want to go for the primary. And I didn't really feel that I was good enough to be a secondary school teacher, because I didn't think I was good. I didn't have any particular subject that I was good enough at. So I went for primary, because then you just do everything. And then when that comes then to that quote with regards to my personal life, again, as you said, we've known each other through a sporting background, but I've, played hockey, basketball, cricket, tennis for school. And then in terms of other bits and pieces, in fact, when we moved house, our removal guys said to my wife, they said, "How many hobbies has your husband got?" As they were unpacking the mountain bike, the road bike, the fishing rods, the bodyboard, the beer making kit, So yeah, that's how I'd kind of describe myself. I'm a bit all over the place. I just got loads and loads of interest. So yeah.
I think anyone who knows me would probably say the same. Very much throw myself into something 100% and I get bored and move on quickly. But you only have one life and all that, so you might as well try a few things. I'm glad you remembered the tweet thing. I asked somebody once, like, how do you get people to ease themselves into this sort of thing when because it can be quite daunting. I had somebody ask me on an interview, tell us about yourself, and I literally didn't know where to start. I froze, and someone said to me, why don't you think about what you would put in a tweet? Because one, it helps you sort of like condense it to the stuff that really matters to you. But I don't know, it somehow makes you think about the question differently. So now I always remember that for all these sort of things I'm doing these days, because I'm not a natural at any of this. But I do find it helps. So thank you for remembering it.
That's all right.
So what I was gonna let's jump straight in the deep end. Do you want to share a little bit about your experiences with mental health? Obviously, whatever you're comfortable with, but I suppose high level, if that sort of eases things in, sort of, why we're here talking today, I suppose, a little bit.
I mean, I'm quite happy to be to talk quite openly about it, because, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to join you and do this, because I think the most important thing is to talk, and through talking we have that greater level of understanding. So for me personally, when I look back, my actual issues kind of started when I was in primary school, and it all started when one of my school teachers, I was in year 3, and one of my school teachers actually called my mum and said, I think you need to take Will to the doctor, because he is in and out of the toilet every 5 minutes. Literally every 5 minutes he's asking to go to the loo. So back then in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, it was, I think my teacher was just worried I had a urine infection or something, Yeah. So I went to the doctor. Oh, there's nothing wrong with him, he's fine. And that was it. Nothing else was done. Whereas now, being a primary school teacher, I know that the support from our young people now is there would have been a referral to a wellbeing hub or the school nurse. But no, so I then struggled through primary school with, they just put it down to being a very nervous child. And yeah, I went through primary school basically now realizing that I was just unbelievably anxious about everything. And then it kind of went away, and that came with the move to high school, the change of setting, me getting into sport in a wider level, and that sport, through sport, I gained confidence, and also through music as well, because I played a number of instruments. My main instrument was a clarinet, and I was in performances, and I was involved in drama, and all those things came together. And it kind of went away. And then all the way through university, no issues until my mid-20s. And at that time, for no particular reason to me, it reared its ugly head again. And again, weirdly, it revolved around a number of things. I became very anxious about going places where with travel, I was full of a lot of what ifs. What if the car breaks down? What if I don't make it on time? What if I can't find somewhere to park? I also found that situations where I might feel trapped. So sitting in a middle row at the cinema, or I found churches really tough, right? Churches where you're sat in a pew, and it's those situations where it might be deemed socially awkward or unacceptable to want to get up and leave. And that added a load of pressure on. So again, it was kind of, and again, for me, weirdly, and it's completely irrational, my kind of anxiety was also based around, what if I need the loo? And when you're in that kind of fight or flight situation, the one thing you feel like you need, and it was that kind of, for me, it wasn't, oh, I kind of need the loo. I felt desperate for the loo all the time. And it's really uncomfortable. It was just really uncomfortable. And the one where people, and other times, just feeling of fear for no reason. And the one way I tried to describe it to someone once was, I said, imagine to yourself imagine a time when you were really scared. I don't know, on a roller coaster just before you know you're about to drop, or something like that, that moment in that fight or flight response. And then I said, turn the sound volume up on that, like it's on full volume, and be like that all day. And it's absolutely exhausting. So you're mentally fatigued, and it is exhausting. And because it's, when you try and explain it to them, because it's not a broken leg or something that they can, you can fix with a plaster and some pins and a metal plate or whatever. Lots of people can struggle to get their head around that. And I also struggled personally, because I like to think that I'm a fairly rational, fairly intelligent person, and my subconscious was taking control of me. And I just genuinely, I got to a point where, in fact, I missed, there was an event that a big event for my dad that I was meant to go to, and I said, I can't come, I can't do it. So I was starting to miss opportunities and not do things because of my anxiety. It got to the point where I also then really got very, very down with it. And it was at that point that I decided I had to do something, because it was taking over my life more and more, and having more and more of a negative effect, not just on me, but the people around me, my wife and my family, my mum, my dad, my sisters, and that was the point that I decided to try and seek some help.
So it sort of felt like a single moment, rather, or an accumulation, I suppose, but that one individual moment probably was
it was a build up over time, and just seeing how it was getting worse, and how I was fed up, kind of. In some parts of my day, some parts of my life were perfectly fine. Other parts were completely, other things that other people could do, were out of bounds to me. I'd stopped doing things. I couldn't enjoy things because I was so anxious and unhappy in those moments. And I couldn't see, it got pretty dark at points, and I couldn't see a way out of it, really. It was starting to make me quite unwell. So
I was nodding along to a lot of that, because and one point might have smiled, but that was a sort of relatable smile, because it was I won't name them because I'm sought their permission prior, but I've got a family member that had a very similar thing, and the bit that really resonated with me was when you said about like the church, because my graduation ceremony was in a massive cathedral, and this person just was terrified at the thought of the same thing. If they're in the middle of a row, they need the toilet. It was all around going to the loo, and what if they needed to get out? And the way we helped with that is they actually travelled there a couple of days before with a friend, like a day out, so they could at least go in, look around, see where the exits were, and they felt terrible. So it's crazy. No, if that's what you need to do to work through it, because what's the alternative? You avoid it, and it's another thing on that got tossed on that pile, that, you know, something that passed you by. So yeah, I can very much relate to that. So I suppose at the time when you talked a little bit there about when you were younger, how the support wasn't there compared to what you see now working in education. Do you want to tell us a little bit about sort of the support you had available at the time when you went to seek help compared to what was sort of missing, I suppose, through all of those years, just as a bit of a comparison?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest break. So what I did was I I actually went to the doctor to start with, and actually my doctor initially was it was quite a shame, because I came away feeling like he hadn't helped me at all. I said I'm really struggling, and he didn't help me at all. And I came away and thought, no, I can't not do anything about this. So I actually referred myself. So most counties have a wellbeing service, and you can do a self referral, which is exactly what I did. And you fill out a questionnaire, and that kind of allows them to triage you in terms of how much need you've got there. I won't go into that now. If we can always talk about it another time, but that process, if we need to. But no, so I referred myself, and I went through some CBT, which is for cognitive behavioral therapy. But part of those sessions, what was really helpful for me, and what was missing when I was a child, was understanding why I was feeling anxious. And although the process was tough, having to unpick myself and unpick a bit more and delve into who I was and why I was like that, whilst that was tough, it allowed me to understand why I was the way I was. And with that came acceptance. And that acceptance of it, and talking about it out loud with someone, really helped me to understand, as I said, why I was, or why I am like I am, and at the height of how difficult it was, why that was happening. And it allowed me to have conversations with people in my family, my mum, my dad, and my sisters, because again, you kind of hide it, and particularly as a guy. And with my thing, it's that embarrassment, isn't it? Because my anxiety revolved around, let's be honest, revolved around needing the loo. I mean, how daft is that? And people, people can laugh at that. And actually, what you've got to do is, once you've said it, there's that relief.
Yeah.
And
there's so many, without interrupting you too much, there's so many people that are sitting on those issues and not saying it, particularly men. And I think back, in the environment, we used to know each other, and anything you divulge, it's not only just a sign of weakness, and might be the difference between getting picked that week and not, or whatever, but it's also a joke that'll last forever. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
And I had one back, when we and this isn't about me, but just to try and sort of, for anyone listening out there that thinks this might be an isolated incident, it's not. Mine was like almost the opposite, in that I had anxiety over using the urinals in busy places. So the issue I had is I had a whole world of fear every time I was at a football match, every time I went to a rugby match, every time I was out with the boys on a sport and night out, and you're in a busy club. And the amount of hours of my life I waited thinking about when to time going in case it was a failed attempt, and then essentially I would be in agony for the rest of that night, day, whatever the event was. So, and that's sort of same issue, but on the flip side of the coin. But did we ever talk about it back then together? Did we? Hell, I didn't know you had that. You probably didn't know I had mine, and that's what talking about it hopefully does. It's just for that one person that it connects with, that feels better about sharing that experience to then tackle it. Because ultimately, I'm sure the same as in your experience is probably the same as mine, that issue doesn't get fixed until you start dealing with it. Unfortunately, it just grows and grows, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, touching on the kind of us and the sports, the groups of friends we had through sports. I mean, yourself being both rugby and hockey, and when I think about those rugby and hockey, I don't know about you, Joel, but did you play university hockey?
Yes, but I didn't last very long because, again, the environment was just not something I was compatible with. I think I'd done one season and then I sat it out.
But like university hockey, at my university, the hockey teams, the men's squads and the rugby squad, it was quite close.
Yeah,
And
all the socials
I
were
think
shared.
it's well documented, the mentality and shenanigans of rugby and hockey university men's squads. And it is a lot of bravado, a lot of picking on people. It's meant as banter, but can have a negative effect. And as you touched on before, like any kind of sign of weakness, and it is honed in on any mistake, any kind of mix up, a funny story, and it will, or you do something stupid, and it will follow you around for years. So the idea of talking, about your mental health issues within that kind of environment, they were your best, some of your best mates, but you wouldn't talk about it. And when you think about coming back to the mentality of things, we've played with people, they've been told they've been hit with a hockey ball, they've been told to man up and crack on, and have found out afterwards they've got a broken wrist. I remember a game where, and I think we must have been playing together, but I think we only had one sub, and I got hit in the head. And opened my head up. I ran into I thought, right, I've got to get back on. I can't go. So I ran into the clubhouse, got taped up, and came back on. And it's just what you did.
That's such a valid subject at the minute, because I'm a big rugby fan, and that's such a hot topic at the moment. That whole, bringing in your HCAs, but we didn't have them then. I finished one game on a broken ankle. There was one game where I knocked myself out on a 5 o'clock game. At a university, and I was being taken out clubbing 2 hours later, and I was still seeing stars. Do you know what I mean? And you just didn't, and you daren't say no. You daren't say, I need to go see someone about this.
And you didn't. And so then, therefore, the idea of after a game, everyone's battered and bruised. Oh, by the way, lads, I need a sensitive ear right now. It didn't. But you're right. But now, I was about to say, many of us would have gone off for an HI, for a head assessment, a head injury assessment. But no, you just cracked on with it. You got a golf ball on your head and you crack on.
But I think the important point there is, for anyone that hasn't been in that environment, like, we're talking about obvious physical injuries here. Like when I broke my ankle, it was clearly broken. When you split your head open, it was clearly split open. And we've all got friends that, bust noses and broke fingers playing hockey in particular. And you're thinking, well, if you don't get any sympathy for a physical injury, one that requires X number of stitches afterwards, what hope have you got of raising, your concerns?
But the good thing is, I think, talking about sport, I think in professional sport, I think the doors are starting to open slightly with professional sports people talking about mental health. And there have been a number of campaigns and stuff of late with that happening, which I can think can only be a good thing. But I think it's continuing to raise awareness. And I think it's also about people feeling confident to take that first step and to ask for help. And that's the key thing, really,
And you mentioned CBT and sort of talking therapies. Was there anything else you found particularly helpful when you were sort of going through that journey? I appreciate none of that falls into place overnight, and it's quite a long process, having done CBT and a few things a couple of times myself. Did you
Yeah.
find anything else helped alongside that, even if it was something as simple as exercise or
Yeah,
something else?
100%. I mean, for me, the one de-stressor I've always had has been exercise and keeping as fit as possible. And in fact, just the one thing that I've found most difficult with my job and this current lockdown, I had another instance where my mental health kind of took a bit of a drop in the middle of October this last year, and it was a culmination of the inability to. We were all working so hard at school, trying to catch up the children from the first lockdown, crikey, this time last year all the way through to September, and then because of the hours I was working, excuse me, I didn't have one. We weren't playing any sports. Hockey was shut down. I wasn't able to exercise as regularly as I would like because I've got some injury at the moment. And then I work on top of that, and there was just no release. There was no way to let off steam. And I think that's what sport has always done. It's been that complete shut off. And when you're tired, I think as well, sport does too. Initially, when you've been out for a run or a big cycle, or you've had a heavy training session, that initially makes you feel tired, so you can get a good night's sleep, restless sleep, a restful sleep, sorry. But then the next day you feel energized, and it's just those good hormones and those good feelings and those good endorphins that keep you going. But I mean, other things that have helped me, I find that I've got a very busy brain. My brain chunters along a lot, and just little things like sometimes what's helped in the past, having a notebook by the bed and noting, and if I'm awake and I can't sleep, note it down, shut the book. I know I've noted it down. If I need to come back to it, I can draw a line under it. Something else that I've really found quite useful is meditation. And there are many apps out there that are great. I find that listening to meditation podcasts, and I've also found quite helpful in the past. There's apps that do sleep stories and stuff like that, just to literally plug the headphones in and think of nothing else. So those things have been really helpful strategies for me as well, because I find it very difficult to switch off. And so that's been really helpful and had a really good sort of calming effect. That meditation and things like, as in addition to the sport, things like I've been quite enjoyed Pilates. I had to do Pilates for quite some time because of a back injury, but I've continued to do that, not only to keep my back in shape, but actually it's not intense, and it's stretching and relaxing and that kind of thing. So that all those things, in addition to the CBT, have helped continue to kind of have helped with the anxiety and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think there's 2 points to note on that for anyone who's sort of maybe new to this, or people are suggested these services and they're a little bit hesitant, is that don't judge every experience the same. I myself have had numerous bouts of CBT, and the first one went horrifically wrong. We don't need to go into details, but essentially just didn't work for me. I was given a student psychologist that was still in their second year, and I was used as a little, if I go too deep, a little bit of a guinea pig. We went to places that CBT shouldn't have gone to, and it didn't work for me. And for a lot of years, that put me off those talking therapies. I've recently just finished, it was the back end of last year, to help me through the pandemic situation, everything else. And that was a totally different experience. And I think the other thing to point out with CBT is that it doesn't just like help you in the moment, it equips you with those tools going forwards, which is something I didn't appreciate from my first couple of sort of far from ideal experiences, because they were very much about plugging a plaster over the hole at the time. And it was only when I sort of got a service, I suppose, that worked for me, that it was teaching me all this stuff, like you mentioned, the sleep sort of thing. So I now know, and for anyone who listens to this from a sort of arthritis, chronic pain point of background, all of our sleep gets impacted, whether it's pain, mental health issues. You know, there's so many things that impact our sleep, and it's so vitally important to us. And I had a horrendous time with it, but those silly little things like, so now I'll go to bed, and if in half an hour it's not working, rather than let my mind go to all them horrendous places that take you away 10 times worse than the position you started in, I'll now get up and try and achieve something. Achieve can sound like a bit of a big word sometimes, but it can be just as simple as, you know, prepping a meal for the next day, or getting, in my case, a little blog post sort of edited, or like I say, a list, because all of a sudden it's out of here and onto something. And I think that they're really useful points for anyone listening to this that maybe hasn't taken that step towards those talking therapies, but stuff you can do to help you now. And yeah, I'll just really hammer home that point that not every experience is the same. It might take a while for you to find what works for you, but when you do, you'll have a tool set that doesn't just help you in the moment, but in your everyday life, doesn't it?
Definitely. And I'd follow that by saying as well, because I've also had used some, as well as CBT, that I accessed through the Wellbeing Hub. I also had spent some time with a counsellor, and I think that's very important as well to pick up on your point there, Joel, because you might go to a counsellor, and it's very much don't be afraid if it's not working for you with that counsellor. Be open with the counsellor that you're using and say, do you know what, this isn't working for me, because you need to find someone that you can work with. And if it's not working, the counsellor is not going to take it personally, because counsellors say it will take you a while, perhaps, to, maybe I'm not the right counsellor for you. You might need to try a few people. So, you know, I couldn't agree with you more, Joel. Don't be afraid to move on if you need to, because you will find the right person for you, and you will know when that happens, because it will click, and you will really start to see the benefits of that. So that, I couldn't agree with you more there, Joel.
Yeah. And my little tell now is that you'll know, because by about session 2, 3 or 4, they'll start reading you before you've even finished telling them what you've done. So for example, I got to the point where I knew what I was doing was wrong. I just couldn't stop the autopilot Joel from sort of enacting it. And by about session 3 or 4, I could already tell what they were going to say, and they could already tell me how I responded to a situation before I'd finished. So I think they're the sort of things you're looking out for, that sort of and it's like anything, you know, two humans can't get on, and it might have been for no reason whatsoever. And it's the same when it comes to professional services. So yeah, don't give up if you do have an initial bad experience. And I would also, just from personal experience, seek those services out before you see a doctor and they try to chuck you on medication, because looking back in my experience, and I know some people obviously need it, and I'm not taking anything away from that, but looking back, I went straight down the antidepressant route, and then eventually it was become antipsychotic. There's some really strong stuff there, and it impacted everything. Whereas looking back at how I handled last year's event and went direct to CBT, it probably could have all been sorted out at that point. So if you are nervous and anxious, and there's a lot of stigma that comes with, you know, medication, as there is some of the talking therapies, the talking therapies are the safest bet you could have. You just try. If it doesn't work for you, then move on to something else. I don't know what your experience is to sort of that.
Yeah, I mean, I have combined. I've combined both, and I am still on medication at the moment. As people may or may not know, a lot of antidepressant drugs in a smaller dose are used to help with anxiety. So I have. The one thing that I was very worried about, I never even, when I had my first round of CBT and stuff, I never even thought about taking medication, because I thought that medication was just purely going to it was just going to cover the problem. But I spoke to a really nice doctor, and he said to me, look, have you thought about this? And I said, well, no, because I just think it's going to be covering the problem and not dealing with it. He said, well, it's not quite how it works. And so I have, not going into too deeply into how the drugs work, but it can allow the brain time with someone with anxiety. And as I said, I've got quite a brain that keeps going very, very quickly all over the place all of the time. It can just allow those thought processes to slow down slightly and give you time to think a bit more and assess a situation. But no, I have found benefits from it, but I do know people who the medication is not the right way. And I think we keep coming back to this thing. You've got to find what's right for you and your situation. I think that's the key thing, because there isn't a one size fits all, because everybody's situation is so different. So I think that's really good. But keep talking, keep asking people, what's your experience been like? And the more that people talk to each other, the more resources we will have to touch base with other people. Of course, you want to talk to the professionals. That's where you should always start. But when you've got a network of people around you who have had similar experiences, you'll get a good feel for how they've dealt with stuff. And that can only help you then decide what routes that you might like to go down as well.
Yeah, and thanks for that insight. That's really interesting. And like I say, talking is the key word there, because probably the difference from my situation from a lot of people, as I hadn't spoke to anyone, not even my partner at the time. I went straight to GP, and then like I say, that I probably needed to get something shared before I went down that route, and I think that held me back for a long while if I'd have just talked to somebody. So yeah, that's a very key point you make. I suppose while we're touching upon talking about, how did you find that experience with friends and family, and did that help or hinder the situation? Because I know that's a bit of a hot topic in the mental health world, and I appreciate if you have to be a little bit careful with your answers.
No, I don't think I do. I think basically there's a history of anxiety in my family, and one of the things that we found, that one of the reasons why I was anxious was my mum's she won't mind me saying this, she's a very anxious person. She suffers with anxiety herself. Her mother did, my grandmother did too. And where my anxiety came from was a lot of the time I felt that, because my father was away a lot, he was in the Royal Navy, and because he was away an awful lot, I as a child, obviously, I'm picking it apart. I was like on high alert, because I knew mum was anxious. I was always looking for ways to try and help to make things not be difficult for her. So I was kind of on high alert. I kind of took on that responsibility of having to be the man of the house when dad wasn't there, even as quite a small young boy. And that's where it came from. But so my mum was so supportive of me getting help and being open, and my sister's just fantastic, and my dad's brilliant as well. But when I first told my dad, it's interesting. We come back to that kind of initial male kind of response. And I said, look, Dad, it really first came up when I had to tell him I couldn't go to this event that was this big event. And I said, Dad, I can't do it. I'm really sorry, I can't come, because I am just, quite frankly, scared. And I said, look, I've suffered with anxiety, and this is a mental health problem for me. I'm not very well mentally. And the first thing was, you're not mentally ill. There's nothing. No. You there's nothing wrong. You're fine. You're fine. And it was that classic kind of bat it back, and perhaps he didn't want to kind of think about that, because his, particularly being kind of Navy services, but also I think his generation, it was very much no, pull your socks up, crack on, everything's fine. You don't show any kind of weakness in inverted commas.
Word that's going to keep coming up.
Yeah, but my family and my wife, Rianne, just absolutely fantastic, and particularly Rianne, my wife, she's had to put up with an awful lot and make a lot of adjustments in order for me to be able to work through things and that kind of thing. But no, but to be fair, we come back to it, Joel. You're probably the first person who I've really talked to in this depth about my anxiety. So that's a telling tale in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
You say talk about friends. In fact, I haven't really told friends.
And also there's levels to it. You think you're talking to people, and then you realize you've crept back into putting it in a box again, and I was very much like that with my physical condition, because it would come and go. When it would go, I'd be straight back in, but I'd move around. So a bit like we touched upon at the start. So it's like, all right, everyone at hockey has found out now I've got this weakness. I better start something else. So I start rugby at the age of 30, and and this sort of thing. And it is, and you don't realise how much you think you're talking. And obviously you've come a hell of a long way. But like you say, there is still more you could do to help yourself and unburden yourself from those challenges a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a thick, but the thing is, we're on we're from me kind of really recognizing that there was an issue up until now. We're talking 15 years in the round. I mean, so I was 23, 24. So in the round of 12 to 15 years, and it's still a work in it's still a work in process. It's something I've still got to be mindful of. It's me recognizing as well. And I think that's the other side of it, that when talking to people, getting some help and stuff, you start to recognize where you are, and you can step in earlier to kind of make sure that you are preempting any issues. And what you also do at that point as well then is you verbalize it early.
Yeah.
So before you would struggle on in silence, what you can do when you've told people around you, you can flag it. And when they understand, it's a massive support to know that, again, just telling someone, do you know what, I'm not doing so well right now. I don't need you to do anything. I just need to tell you I'm not doing so great, because that's helped me just to tell someone that I'm not doing as well as I have been over, it's important to do that too.
Yeah, and also there are lots of ways, like this is something I steal from the sort of the chronic pain sort of world I also operate in, but there are also ways of having that daily conversation without, because a lot of people feel like they bore people. I know, especially like me, every day I'll be like saying to my wife, back hurts today, or this hurts, or I'm feeling a bit low. And you get to that point where you think, I'm boring myself, I don't want to keep sharing it. But it's important for you to tell somebody. So one, that you're sharing it, but two, it's also, you get the support you need. But there's still little things you can do, like even like a little traffic light system. There's some people wear wristbands, so that you don't even have to have that conversation with your partner. They know if you're wearing the amber or the red wristband that you're struggling, and they can do what they need to do to help with that. And one of the things I plan to do for when Dylan gets a bit older is almost have like a 1 to 5 scale on the fridge, so that every day I can come down, and whether that's a mental or a physical health thing, you mark it, and then straight away expectations are set. So right, Daddy's struggling today, so I'm not going to suggest we do X, Y, and Z, or we're not going to all plan a big day out or whatever. And I think so there's lots of little things that you can do like that. But I think the important thing just to sort of go back to is that there's 2 people on this call, and I'm sure there are many more who listen to this back, and we both ran into the exact same issues when trying to tell our parents, in particular when it was sort of like a male on male thing. So those issues are very much there, but would we change a thing about going through a little bit of headache to share that? I know I certainly wouldn't,
No,
and for me,
not.
and everyone's family situation is different. For me, that's still a bit of a daily battle. Do you know what I mean? I come from a family, where it's all very much, they work with their hands, builders, that they are a stereotypical male on the mental health issues you can probably get. And there's all sorts of signs in the family of elements of mental health, but would you dare say that? No. But I've at least gone past that point of having a lot of drama and aggro at the very start when I started experiencing these things in my 20s, to now, just a simple message from a sibling saying, are you okay, mate? That for me is such a huge step forwards in my bubble. And someone else listening out here who might be in that same position thinking, I can't tell my old man that X, Y, and Z. Well, trust me, you work at it and you get to a day when you get a message that says, are you struggling? That is like night and day in terms of how much that easier it makes your life. It doesn't happen overnight, but again, come back to that word talking is the only way you're gonna sort of make a change there, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing to take from, if you're listening, take from the conversation, is that's what we're doing right now, having a chat, talking about it, and that's how you start opening the doors to finding what's going to work for you, and to get the support you need.
Thank you for everything you shared there, Will. It's been absolutely brilliant.
My pleasure.
I suppose a couple of final little questions is as a sort of, it's quite big, so maybe not a short answer, but like as a sort of society or as individuals, what do you think people, if there's someone sitting there listening to this who would like to do more to help people like yourself, what would your sort of advice be for how they would approach that? Say that they've got a loved one or someone that they're worried about. Is there anything from the other side of that conversation that you would offer as advice?
I mean, I think the key thing is that if you're noticing that something's not quite right with someone, it's actually sometimes just ask. Because I think if someone had, I don't think in my situation, and again I can only speak to my, I don't think I would have all of a sudden got all defensive. I don't think if someone had asked me and said, you know what, Will, there's something not right here, what's going on, that question probably would have opened things up for me. And I think then from that point there, it's listen. Because you listen, don't necessarily to, you might not understand it, you might not get it. And I've come across, people who, when you talk to them, they don't get it, they don't understand it. But the key thing is to listen, and then support that person in whatever avenues they go down, because it's going to be about them and that self-discovery of what's going to work for them. And it's just being there to hold a hand, not necessarily provide any answers, not to try and fix them. We've got to discover that ourselves. So it's don't be afraid. If you're seeing someone you think is struggling, don't be afraid just to ask the simple question, you don't seem quite right. What's going on for you right now? And just that simple question could just give that one person, it doesn't have to be a family member, it could be a colleague at work, it could be, someone, in a sports team that you're, or a group that you're part of. And that could just open the door to them, and you being the one person that allows them to talk where they haven't felt they can have or could have done before. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's absolutely valuable advice. I said to somebody sort of fairly recently that there's two steps to supporting someone with mental health. There's the asking if someone's okay, which is fantastic, but also just as importantly is then what you do with the information that they share. Because all too often people will pay lip service to it and do the whole "are you okay," but then don't like the answer you give necessarily, or they don't know how to respond. Like our experiences in those early days, people don't know how to respond with that information, and then that can end up setting somebody backwards. So I think, I think that's absolutely fantastic what you put, that whole ask how you can help, ask the question, and then support with what comes back from that. And I suppose the final thing for us to end on then, that I would ask is, if someone's listening to this and they're screaming at their phone or whatever device they're listening to, on saying that's me, I'm there, etc. What sort of message of hope would you have for them, or sort of any sort of one piece of advice?
It is okay not to be okay. And when you have realized for yourself that you are not okay, and if you're not okay at the moment, there is help out there. And as we've said, you don't have to necessarily go, if you're worried about going to your doctor and sitting face to face with someone and saying it, then as I said, if you look for your county, your local area, there will be an online way of just referring yourself, which can feel a little bit less intimidating than going into a GP's practice and having to say, I don't really know what's wrong, but there's something wrong with me, or what, I just can't put my finger on it. Whereas when you fill out, those Wellbeing Hub referral forms, it asks you questions, and you start to already, just from that initial point, start to understand what's going on for you. And I did personally find it less kind of stressful and less invasive than having to go to someone face to face and say those words. I was able to, so there are lots of ways of doing this. There's lots of help out there, and a simple internet search can point you in the right direction. But that's there is nothing. It might sometimes feel like all is lost, but it's not. And as I said, it's okay not to be okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Will. And I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this now that they can either relate to that or are sort of well on board with that. I will put some links to support and NHS sort of websites and everything in the show notes for anyone listening to this that would like to access that, or hopefully Will's inspired you to sort of seek out some of those services. But yeah, just massive thank you, Will. Like, you know, I've known you years and there's things on there on that conversation that I'm discovering now. So it shows you that that talking thing needs to be a lifetime thing. You know, and whether that's you're listening to this from a mental health or a physical health point of view, I think it applies to both. But yeah, just on behalf of everybody that takes anything away from this, thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your story.
Thanks for inviting me, because just doing this as well for me has, again, it's another person spoken to, it's another person that I've spoken to about it, and it's part of that process. So yeah, thanks for inviting me on, Joel. Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you, Will.